Hi, Chris Gunning here from NIQ Global Finance Operations. I hope to share with you some of my learnings from my leadership over my career in building, designing and running shared service centers and driving global finance transformations all over the world. I hope to show you some real examples of empathetic leadership and touching upon talent and technology as we go through those journeys. I hope you enjoy the show.
Good afternoon. We're today with Chris Gunning, already 20 years in shared services and transformations. When I met you the first time, you were the head of the shared service center of Unisys. But in the meantime, I think you moved from Heineken, Apollo Tires, Vion, and now currently in the role of in NielsenIQ. Next to that, you're also into the SSON Global Leadership Board. So really an expert when it comes to shared services and transformation. Today, we are here discussing actually together, and I try to pick a lot of your brain about all your experiences, the do's and don'ts, and actually also hear some practice examples actually from you where hopefully we can learn a lot from. Before I met you in Unisys, you were actually a consultant. What was actually the one thing which moves you to go into operations, into the business?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I guess if we go back to my early days of KPMG, if I rewind the clock a little bit before that, I'm going to take you back to Belfast in the 1980s. You know, Belfast in the 1980s was very different to the city that it is today. You know, when I was growing up there, it was part of the Troubles. It was part of the conflict in the north of Ireland. So when I was at university, I was actually studying accounting. My dad thought it'd be great. You know, you go do an accounting career in finance. So after about 3 months of studying accounting, I was like, I was not enjoying debits and credits. I really wanted to drop out of university. I really wanted to go and do social anthropology. And my dad's going, are you absolutely crazy? And, you know, dads are always right. But, you know, I knew I was never destined to be your typical CPA, your typical bean counter. We need those guys in the world. But really, I wanted to combine that opportunity of finance and my exploration of new cultures, new countries, and new worlds. So I quickly took a job with Unisys. You mentioned Unisys, and that's where we first met. I initially worked in the internal audit space. So really for 4 years, I had no home. I had a laptop, I had a credit card, and I had a backpack. That was me. I traveled the world for 4 years. And that was really my first flavor of shared services. So really for 2 years, I was living across Europe. And for the next 2 years, I was heading up the team in Latin America. And this was like the late 90s. So Unisys at the time were building their first shared service centers, captive shared service centers. You know, we had a fantastic center in Coral Springs, just outside of Miami. So really getting to meet these amazing Latinos and Latinas from all over the world. But that concept of shared services really grasped me. So obviously as a good auditor, as a compliance and risk guy, I kept finding problems in the process going, hey, your paid on time's not right. You got too many errors on your invoices. Why your reconciliation's not being signed? So the leader at the time in Unisys, an amazing, one of the best leaders I've ever worked for in my life, a guy called Tom McGlynn, tapped me on the shoulder, Chris, you got to stop writing me these nasty audit reports. Can you actually come over and help me build shared services? So I guess at the time I was dating my current partner, and, you know, the commute between Belfast and Brazil and Belfast and Puerto Rico wasn't so easy. So Tom got me a job here actually in Amsterdam where I've made my home today, 22, 23 years later. And I was initially running the record to report center for Unisys. We built an amazing center here. And Oscar, I've never looked back. I just love what has kept me in this world of transformation and shared services.
And also, if you look at now, because you started on the accounting part, but moving more into transformations, leading big teams, global teams, multiple shared service centers. What were things in your business life which actually made you to have this approach of leadership?
So I think that's a great question. So I think some of the most defining memories of my career, when I look back over the last 20 years, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is my association with India, working in India as a country. So if I cast my mind back to about the early 2000s, we had this amazing shared service center in Amsterdam, about 350 people. But like many organizations, we were looking for ways to transform, to take out costs, to grab labor arbitrage. So I'd just come back from, I'm not sure whether it was a Deloitte event with Peter Mulder or an SSON event, okay, back in the day, where we were hearing what others were doing. Remember, in Unisys, we were pioneers. Not many other people were building shared services in the late 90s. We didn't have, like we had today, this amazing experience with partners, with consultants, with technology vendors like yourselves who bring now this expertise to the table. So we were pioneers. So I remember, coming back from one of these events and saying to my boss, we were in Dublin having a strategy meeting, going, shall we move to India? And I put my hand up. And the rest of the room went silent. They went, Chris, you must be absolutely crazy. No. We're not moving work to India. Where's the case study for that? So we did a little bit of research and I put some business cases on the table. And about 6 weeks later, I'm out there with my hard hat on in a building site in Bangalore, laying the first bricks of this what would become an amazing shared service center for Unisys in Bangalore in India that really excited me for the next 15 years. I think I spent almost 20 years of my career in Unisys, and we really built this amazing center from the ground up, and we end up growing that center to 400 or 500 people, not just in transactional finance, but all the way up the value chain with the likes of indirect tax and statutory accounting and commercial finance and FP&A. And I think that's what ignited my love affair with India. When I think of what I probably spent 25% of my life on the road. And
one of your mantras is never stand still. And what would be interesting is, first of all, where does this drive come from? And how did it actually influence the way you manage?
I think, if you're not moving forward, you're static. And in any organization, whether it's a finance organization, a GBS organization, I think we want to keep pushing boundaries. This drive of innovation, of continuous improvement, this idea of a growth mindset. And I think, if you're not challenging yourself and challenging the status quo, you're going to stay static. And all of a sudden, the competition is going to be right behind you and overtaking you. So one of the things I always try to challenge my team and my leaders and anybody that I'm around is, never stop learning. Just keep learning. That growth mindset is, get out of your comfort zone, because if you step over here, that's where the magic actually happens. Continue to challenge yourself, to upskill, to learn, to be curious. So I think, being dynamic and keeping moving is something I'm super passionate about. And even in NIQ today, one of the things that is super exciting is, probably for the first time in my career, I'm not surrounding myself only with accountants. So I've always been very much building, communities of guys out of college who have finance backgrounds, who can process invoices, who can, read balance sheets, who can close the books. But I think with the advent of technology, I'm actually starting to realize, if we complement some of those amazing finance skill sets with skill sets like data scientists, guys that can understand reporting and insights, amazing training leads who can help us with learning and development and creating that culture of innovation. Mechatronics engineers, mechanical engineers. I've got an amazing guy on my team from a Lean Six Sigma background. He's only worked in manufacturing before, but applying those on the factory floor within finance is really helping us enable the finance service delivery teams to get better, faster, stronger, more efficient. So I've always loved this notion of never standing still and keep trying to move yourself forward, but also important to move your teams and move your business forward. And it's something that, I still very much encourage today. So I think it's all about change, driving innovation is where that mantra came from. And it served me well over my career. So I think that's where maybe, 20 years ago when we were pioneers, a lot of it was learning, failing fast and moving on. I think the beauty today about our industry is that, we've got many organizations who have been there, done that. So building a network, building a community that we can lean in on. Oscar, you're part of this amazing shared services community that we have around the world. And, whilst every journey is different, every transformation journey is different, and every story is different, I think many of us have gone through the same challenges with the same battle scars. So trying to introduce like-minded people to share their examples and share their stories. And one of the things I love doing internally is to get people excited, show them, it's not about just doing what you've always done. You didn't go to college to punch in invoices for the rest of your life. You didn't go to college to add up balance sheets. I remember, this takes me back to my auditing days way before, the advent of some of the technology. I'd be spending weeks in a bank adding up manually, number by number, on pages and pages and stacks of dot matrix ink paper. I don't know why they just didn't trust that the computer was right, but that was us spending hours and hours. Thankfully now, with the advent of technology, we want to be able to use those finance skills for our associates to drive insights, to do something more productive with their qualification rather than punching in invoices. So I try to show them the art of possible. We're not using this technology to replace you. We're using this technology to complement you. And to again, it goes back to that growth mindset and innovation. So
yeah, interesting. But that will also be not only different. If you look at what kind of people you have, accountants, whether they're in finance or they're more into processes, etc. But also you have a lot of experience with Apollo Indian, Heineken being Dutch, and then started Shared Service Center in Krakow, Vion, Ukraine. You mentioned already a few times India. So a lot of different cultures, a lot of different actually experiences, also with transformations. Maybe you can take us with us in an example where you're really proud of. And maybe also good to explain is why, in your opinion, the success was made where in other situations maybe you can fill.
Yeah, you're bringing back some amazing memories there. Having built centers, as you say, all over the world: Ukraine, Pakistan, Brazil, Australia, India. Look, I think every one of those stories I'm proud of. I'm proud of the teams that we built. I'm proud of the work that we delivered. I'm proud of the customers that we served. I'm going to take a really live, current example. I am super proud of where we are right now today on our journey with NielsenIQ, with NIQ. So I only joined the company about 2 years ago. It was initially in a finance transformation role. And I've moved into what we're calling finance operations. We're really taking what was an existing shared services function and really taking it uptown to really become a world-class cutting-edge finance GBS organization. Now, when we looked at what we had, we were okay. We had a really good footprint across the world. We had our center in Pune with 3 satellite centers, Colombia in where we are in Bogota, Bucharest in Romania, and Guangzhou in China. But we felt we could do more. We could do better. So with my boss and with myself, and I have this amazing boss, Drew Gargillo. He spent many years running human capital for PwC. We sat in Madrid about a year ago and we designed on a piece of paper what we thought a world-class finance operations model should look like. And we drew the model on a piece of paper. We designed the target operating model. And really, I went out and I hired 14 new amazing leaders to help really build this organization. So if you think almost we have 3 towers. We have the delivery tower, which is the bread and butter of any GBS organization. They're the ones managing the teams, managing the work, managing the people, managing the delivery. We went out and hired 14, a number of amazing senior service delivery leaders from scratch. I'm a big believer in the process of global process ownership. We didn't have that concept at the time. We went out and hired amazing GPOs. I believe GPOs, so the SDLs are running the factory of today. The GPO should be looking at strategy on the horizon for the factory of the future, thinking policy change, process change, how we upskill our talent, the latest, greatest technology, the enabling technology in the marketplace. And then this third team that obviously I mentioned is the process excellence team, the operational excellence team, where we've put in training, onboarding, data science, reporting, analytics, continuous improvement, service management. And I really think where we are today, we have taken what was a well-functioning shared service center, but we've really gone uptown and created this amazing culture. We've moved into a new facility in Pune. We're attracting some of the best talent in Pune. And I couldn't be more excited. Now, the journey's not over. I think no journey, there's never an end point. We've still got some more transitions to do. But I would say, again, we've moved beyond just what was transactional finance into really value-add finance. This is part of an overall finance transformation journey for the organization. We're not doing this in isolation. but really for the organization to really put finance operations at the heart of the overall finance community. So we're now doing great services out of Pune, like tax, like indirect tax, like commercial finance, like statutory accounting. And again, I am super excited to be part of this journey in NielsenIQ.
I know there were more occasions in your career, actually, that you engaged a bit more serious trouble and very big challenges, which are more difficult to overcome and probably also didn't lead to the results you hoped to. Can you share an example of one of those situations that the challenges were bigger or even too big?
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's the true sign of an empathetic leader is that they're willing to show their scars. So obviously, I won't name and shame the organizations or the companies, but look, transformation journeys aren't always a success, and not always for the reason of the project team doing it. So maybe in one organization, we were working on building out a global GBS organization, but we had a change of leadership at the top, a change of CEO and a change of CFO, and they just took us down the path of a different direction. It happens in life. It happens in business, And again, I think there's two approaches you can take. You can accept it. You can try and accept what it is, hand off, get over it, and move on to the next phase of your journey. Or I've unfortunately seen leaders take this very, very personally. And it's, things aren't personal in business. Sometimes it's just a matter of a point in time, an inflection point. Sometimes you have to pivot. Another example was during the pandemic. How many organizations around the world may have been on a path of centralization or offshoring or transformation, but what was happening in the world around them? People were dying on our planet in organizations, factories. The whole supply chain was interrupted. So many organizations had to put their transformation journeys on hold. They had to pivot. They maybe had to go and do something else. And again, I think it's learning from these experiences. There's been other times where maybe you found out that ultimately you've started to work, but then some of the funding or the dollars dry up, or you have to pivot. So I know there was one organization, I think we tried to build a multifunctional GBS with 7 or 8 towers. Somewhere along the journey, we decided to scale back and we ended up going forward with only 3 or 4 of those towers, including finance, I'm glad to say. But again, these are realities that happen in business, and they happen for a reason. Change of leadership, change of strategic priority, mergers and acquisitions. And I think it's rolling with the punches, as they may say. It's like, don't take it personally. Take what you can from the good parts of that journey and apply them in your next journey or in your next organization. Learn to show those battle scars and share. So I think some of the lessons from that are. I always say, keep your business case as your North Star, as your real mantra. Why are we going on this journey in the first place? I think you got to be true to yourself. Does that business case stack up? Or are we really achieving our North Star? If all of a sudden you start deviating from that, well, sometimes you got to ask your questions. Well, maybe we're not going in the right direction, or maybe the North Star was not right in the first place. So I think humility and humbleness to accept the fact that not every journey is going to be a success. Sometimes you might be driving to the south of France and your car breaks down on the way. It was probably not your fault. You may end up having to take the bus or the plane and to get to your eventual destination. But I think to be able to accept that failure can happen is so important in the world of transformation.
That's good. I remember still one of the one-liners of Richard Branson on the question why he was so successful, and he says I'm so successful because 9 out of 10 times I start a business, it fails, but I'm smart enough to cut it off and don't continue it, and that's the reason why I'm so successful. And that's actually also in shared services. When you see that you will not succeed, then either bring it back to a smaller or change direction. The funny thing, we already have we talk a while about transformations, and actually you make a plan, you have a strategy, you put it on paper, and then it still looks very very nice. In reality, it's more complex, of course, because first of all, you take a bit away from the current owner. which is actually always saying we're doing fine. And then also you have the problem in the technology is because transforming systems, transforming data. It's more complex often than we try to admit. We have the shadowing mechanism where we simultaneously have the old system and the new system till it works, etc. Still, we see in reality with a lot of clients, a lot of problems occur with this finance transformation. And also, especially based on the technology, because technology is often seen as a solution, but in reality, it also has its limitations. It could be also interesting. You have a lot of experience with transformations. If you could share a few examples where we see a bit the effect of technology and transformation, and how it can work, what we can learn of your experience in this.
Yeah, and I love what you said there about technology is often seen as the solution. We'll just put in the technology and we'll take out 50% of our heads, 50% of our cost. It's never that simple. It's never that easy. And I think, one of the reasons why a lot of organizations struggle with technology implementations, technology transformation, technology adoption is not always having the right attention and focus on change management. There's been, as we go through, as you say, you're taking your project plan from a piece of paper to really putting it into practice. Quite often, we just underestimate the level of change, the amount of change. Putting a system in place. And I'll give a really real example here that I experienced once. It was an end-to-end vendor management solution that was meant to be the be-all and end-all, straight through lights out processing, never have to touch an invoice. Great, we can retire the P2P shared service center. Technology will do it. You and I know that's further, as far from the truth as possible. That as an organization, we weren't part of the problem, we were part of the solution, but there was a complete lack of attention to the amount of effort on change management. So, the amount of effort to train users, to train the end users, the amount of effort to train the vendors on how to submit invoices, how to raise, access their POs, the lack of communication around that change, the lack of, the underestimation of the amount of resource to be used in user testing, adoption testing, rollout, data transformation, cleansing the data, a lack of, underestimating the resource and the skill levels required to operate the system. It wasn't just maybe somebody who could punch in invoices all of their life. Maybe that we had to now train them on how to solve problems and answer vendor queries and really move up the skill, the value curve and with their skill set. And I think I've seen that many times in my career, not just with a vendor management solution, but we so often underestimate the power of change and change management. And, if any of us have ever studied Cotter's principles of change management, and I know I've used that many times throughout my career, it's so important to have change management, not as an afterthought or thought, but very much at the forefront of any transformation journey that you do. And there's amazing individuals and leaders out there who actually do change management as part of their career. The same way maybe I'm a CPM, an accountant who's fallen into the shared services. Some of the best leaders I've ever worked with are organizational designers who can really help us drive change top to bottom in an organization. So again, the technology is not a silver bullet. I always, when I look at technology, I always put it in three buckets. I think there's the big enterprise-wide technology, the ERPs, the EPMs, the SAPs, the Oracles of the world. That's a beast in itself. That change can take years and years. You've got to partner with your IT organization. You cannot underestimate the level of change. I think there's that emerging middle level of technology. So when we go to the SSON events, the Deloitte events, we see these amazing vendors who over the last 15, 20 years can specialize in record to report enablement, that can specialize in P2P enablement, can specialize in order to cash enablement. And I think these are really cool technologies that I think are helping organizations take forward and actually can get you a 30, 40, 50% reduction in optimization and productivity but you got to focus on the people as well. You cannot forget the people in the change management. And then I think there's this emerging layer of technology, and I'm calling it citizen led. Within our organization, and it's something that I want more of. I want all 4, 5, 600 guys in our shared services in our finance operation, focusing on citizen led, like RPA, like macros, like scripting, like low code, like no code, like analytics tools and capabilities. And that's something that I'm seeing. Obviously, the change management and that is a lot less than the other two types of buckets. But it's certainly an area that I'm seeing. I'm trying to really encourage to drive citizen-led transformation across our organizations, and hopefully we're going to see more and more of that as we make inroads with AI and Gen AI. But change management and technology adoption is ignore it at your peril.
Yeah, well, very good. But we will go a bit more, I think, on the change management part as well. You chose to implement a technology which was actually promising to do full end to end from vendor till payment, etc. Process. You don't need people in the P2P. If I hear a story like that, I can already think about 10 points why it wouldn't be possible. And you give an other example where you say record to report. I can buy that because record to report is fully on your own data. So actually the limitations are actually all in your own hand. If you look at hire to retire, to order to pay, or in any process where there is external influences, where there are many parts of the process which are not owned by the shared service center, then any technology solution is impossible. But still, you with the leadership team, or I assume you were part, decided actually to do the implementation of this technology.
Yeah. And I'm sure we're not alone. I mean, we get excited, we get blindsided by these vendors with their amazing stories, and maybe in one organization they have been able to deliver 80%, but that, maybe that's the extreme outlier. I guess quite often, when we're doing business cases, we do get very excited and grasp the power of technology, and maybe we don't always ground ourselves in reality as to what some of the problems may be. I think as the world is evolving, I think the power of data is something that we got to consider more and more, to figure out how we can leverage that data to help us smooth those transitions, to smooth those implementations. So I think if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, when we were making new systems, moving over systems, we brought a lot of old data, uncleansed data with us. I think one of the secrets these days is, before you do any technology implementation, is really to try and cleanse the data as best as you can. Whether it's cleaning up your vendor management file, whether it's cleaning up your chart of accounts, to try and make it as simple as possible, because garbage in, garbage out. Something that we continue to say. I first started using computers, I guess 30, 40 years ago. I had a little Commodore 64 at home, did a little bit of programming. It was mostly for playing games. But even back then, as the data has multiplied and escalated within organizations, the power of having to ensure that data is clean is so critical before we move through implementations. But yeah, I guess we got to be realistic. Let's not get super excited when vendors are selling us the most shiniest product. It also comes at a cost. I got very excited in an organization once I was building a service management ecosystem. I really, from an employee experience perspective, it was so cool. It was cutting edge. It could do everything I really wanted with end-to-end service management. And I brought it to the table with the leadership, and they were going, okay, this is nice, but show me the real business case. Sometimes experience is hard to quantify. It's a little bit fluffy. And we end up, because of competing priorities, there's other IT projects that probably had better rates of return. I ended up getting bumped down the queue. And instead of the latest, shiniest version of that tool, I got, I would say, the entry-level version of that tool. But we made it work. We can, by using the right change management and gathering the right excitement around it, I think you can make those tools and technologies work. But yeah, we got to become realistic when we're looking at business cases. The latest, shiniest product is not always suitable for your organization. A lot of it depends on scale as well. What may work for a $40 billion company may not work for a $4 billion company. And I think, we gotta you got to balance that stability and innovation as well. So, do we want to really undergo 3, 4, 5 years of change when we may have other competing priorities on the horizon?
Yeah, good to hear. Yeah, in that case, also, it's a bit learning out of experience. See that not every technology is working. Technology is not the silver bullet, and you need to balance actually in technology the innovation and actually being able to deliver. Because also when you start to implement some technology which does not work, it is also jeopardizing actually your SLAs. And how do you manage that? That is actually also always the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. So I think performance management and performance measurement, you mentioned the SLAs, KPIs, operating level agreements, they're really at the heart of what we do. So what we do in GBS and finance operations is serving internal customers for the most part. So I think we got to hold ourselves accountable and responsible. And this is where I love the power of, I guess, the combination of global process owners and that continuous improvement process excellence team. So when you start to see your KPIs go south, maybe going from green to amber or amber to red, having the right team of experts to collaborate, cooperate beside you, having functional expertise, having Six Sigma, DMAIC, lean expertise, and having that strategic vision around the knowledge of the process. I love that power of collaboration and teamwork to really help you get back on track to whether it's a technology failure, whether it's a process failure, whether it's a learning failure from an employee and associate themselves. I'm really trying to figure out what is the root cause behind that, but then pulling on the different levers to either make the technology better, to reskill the people, to uptrain the people again, do we need to change our policies? Do we need to change our processes? Remember, it's not all about technology. We keep coming back to this theme and thread. Technology is not always the silver bullet. In organizations, I've worked on strategies where, especially with GPOs, where we really look at four major buckets. What is your policies? What are your procedures? What are your processes? What levers can we pull there? What do we need to do with talent? Do we need to upskill talent? Do we need to change talent? Do we need to develop talent? Do we need to get them different skill sets? And then this area of automation, both big ticket automation as well as, the continual improvement, the little tweaks, the bringing of the wrench and the spanner to make a little tweak there, make a little tweak there, to ultimately make your process and your technology even incrementally better, to move it up from maybe an amber SLA to a green SLA.
Good, good. And so the main message also, don't rely too much on technology. Always try to improve, and also take in mind that you always need to improve, because once you have the migration, you are in the first stage. And also in the way you set up the shared service center in the teams, you always have an excellence team, which is actually looking at how can we improve, how can we actually audit our process and see where we fail and get better. Also, when you managed actually global teams, you adapted a and you built it also a sort of a leadership style, which you are currently also exploring. Can you share a few of the principles of your leaderships?
I'm going to tell you a little story about leadership. I always tell that. I tell this to my children. I tell this to new leaders. They may laugh. So when going back to Belfast, the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, we only had 3 TV channels. I think our 4th TV channel only arrived sometime when I was a teenager. But every Christmas, I'd watch with my mum and dad The Wizard of Oz. So we all remember The Wizard of Oz. In fact, I used to read my daughter when she was growing up the bedtime story. So, hopefully you know The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy and Toto were in Kansas. The tornado came, blew them somewhere over the rainbow, and they ended up in the land of Oz. So Dorothy was keen to get home, but she was told, before you get home, you have to go and meet the Green Man, the wizard himself. So she went off on her journey, and as she was going, following the yellow brick road and battling the flying monkeys and the evil witches, she bumped into 3 characters. The first character that she met was the Tin Man. And the Tin Man, if you remember, he didn't have a heart. But she picked him up and she walked, and we'll get you a heart when we visit the wizard. Then the next one that she met was the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow, the straw man, he didn't have a brain. So, okay, Dorothy says, I'll take you along. And then the third person that she met was the lion, and the lion was looking for courage. And really, okay. So eventually Dorothy found the Tin Man, found the wizard, and, eventually the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the lion were happy. But I always say, look, for any leadership, it's not rocket science. If you lead with your heart, you lead with your brain, and you lead with courage, you lead with conviction, you lead with boldness, that will get you far in life. You don't need to read 100,000 leadership books. I certainly didn't. But by following those principles of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and, brain, heart, and courage, that would be my recommendation to anybody starting on a leadership career. And again, I try to display that in the global context.
Very nice, Anil. Thanks for sharing. If we look to the future for shared service centers, what kind of changes do you actually expect in the coming years? And how do we keep up, how we stay ahead?
Yeah, so it goes back to never stand still, innovation, continuous improvement. So I'm amazed, Oscar, we've managed to get through a lot of this podcast without talking about generative AI. I think that's the buzzword at the moment. And many of us are really grappling to try and find real use case studies. I think there's something exciting coming down with AI, intelligent automation, but particularly generative AI as well, as we really explore, language networks and large data models. I don't profess to be an expert in that field, but I'm really hoping through the power of some of these new artificial intelligences, we can really keep pushing the boundaries of innovation forward. I'm encouraging all of my team members, keep yourself up to date and current. I don't expect you to become coding experts, but really understand the power of automation, the power of intelligent automation. Play around with Copilot. When in NIQ, we now have a secure version of Copilot that all of our teams can use securely in their day-to-day work, to create presentations, to take minutes of their meeting. And I know that's AI at its most simple form, but I think over years this is going to really come down and help revolutionize the industry. I mean, the rate of change, the pace of change in our world today is like nothing that we have ever seen before. When we were growing up, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and being on the internet, being on the modem with your dial up through the telephone line. Now, you're talking about like high speed fiber optic cables around the world. I think the pace and rate of change is like nothing we've ever seen before. So there's a great quote, and I'm going to read, so I just don't get it mixed up. But there's an amazing quote that I've used before. In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And that's what I encourage all of us to do. Get yourselves ready for the future. If you don't keep learning and you don't keep trying to acquire new skills, well, really, the world is going to change before you've had a chance to catch up on it. And, what the future holds, I really don't know. But I think it's going to be a very different world of shared services. We're going to rely a lot more on technology, but I think we're always going to have a human in the loop to really add those problem-solving skills, that human touch, that personal connection, and really drive insights to what the technology can give us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think as well, AI, a big buzzword. I think in a lot of cases, it's used also in cases where it's not artificial intelligence as well, but it needs to be the combination actually also, because any computer, any AI will never have the common sense we were equipped with when we were born. And I think that is very one of the examples you already had is by thinking technology can do something which actually, if you use common sense, you know that it's impossible, or you're so dependent on external factors that it's very difficult to manage. I think that combination is very valuable. As a finalizing question, and thanks for sharing actually this nice insights with a good combination also from business and personal experience, is do you still have for future leaders a short advice?
Be your authentic self. I mean, even when I realized back in the day, I didn't want to be that number crunching chartered accountant sitting in practice in Belfast. And I was true to myself and took a different path. So I think be curious, be bold, don't be afraid to take risks. follow your heart. Do what makes you happy. You don't want to end up in a career, sitting behind a desk all day that if you're not excited by it. The other thing I would say to everybody, and I encourage this, I'm just back from a nice vacation as well. Work-life balance is so, so important. I think, mental health within the workplace is something that we as leaders cannot promote enough. I've seen too many examples of my career of burnout, of people working, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Guys, don't do it. We only have one life on this planet. Do find opportunities to spend time with yourself, with your friends, with your family. Do things that you have fun with. Oscar, I'm big into my metal music. I'm big into my collecting vinyl. Big into my craft beer. I love my sports. Find time outside of the workplace to have that good work-life balance as well. I think that's so important. It's okay not to be okay. If you've got mental health challenges, take them up with your boss. Make sure that it's part of your workplace, that you're promoting diversity, inclusion, and well-being within the workplace. But I think, one piece of advice, just be your authentic self. Be curious and go have fun doing it. And I've certainly had fun with you here today, Oscar. Brought back some amazing memories. But hopefully I've been able to share a few nuggets of information that people may remember, or next time they see The Wizard of Oz, they might go, that bloody crazy Irish guy who was sitting in that podcast studio in Amsterdam. He was actually right talking about the brain, the heart, and the courage.
No, very good, very good. Thanks for sharing. I liked it as well, and that's also something I like about you is a lot of people refer to I don't know, management books or very highly educated thoughts. Where I often try to also get an analogy with something like sports or a film, because it does match with a lot of people much more than all the intelligent stuff. But I think it was interesting enough. I hope the listeners also had fun. And thank you very much, Chris. And it was fun for me as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for having me, Oscar.
If you like this episode, follow our channels or sign up at transparentglobal.com for more insights.